Day one of the ACC Women's Asia Cup is done, and we have two very interesting games to talk about in this video. One involved UAE and Nepal, and a result which can only be described as a very cherished upset in the history of this tournament, and you'll know why in a bit. And the other was India getting off to a predictably good start in its title defense, beating Pakistan in their campaign opener. Let's take both of these games one at a time. Let's talk about the first one, UAE versus Nepal. Now, to give you a little bit of context about this fixture, UAE is ranked 16th in the ICC Women's T20I rankings, while Nepal is 5 spots away in 21st place. So when you look at this clash on paper, especially when you have a side like UAE, which a couple of months ago ran Sri Lanka very, very close in the semi-final of the ICC T20 Women's World Cup qualifier, you'd think that UAE sort of had this win in the bag. And they did. They came into this fixture as favourites. But that tag got a little bit difficult to carry on through this game, I guess, because when they came in and they opted to bat first, they just seemed out of sort right from the word go. Nepal has very promising bowlers, but they still have inexperience in terms of how to set their fields, how to really streamline their strategies, how to press the neck of the opposition and really keep that pressure going. UAE in a lot of ways made that task very, very easy for Nepal today because they were completely out of sorts in the way they even adapted to the bowling changes, to the wind that was going on in Dambulla. They weren't able to pick out the right line and length, and they ended up making these false shots, holing out to fielders, not be able to find gaps and allowing that dot ball and boundary pressure to get to them. Eventually, UAE could only manage 115 for 8 in their 20 overs. In this entire batting effort, a 32-run stand between Hina Hotchandani and Khushi Sharma was perhaps the highlight. Khushi eventually went on to top score for UAE with a 39-ball 36. None of the stars in the team like Isha Oza or Tirtha Satish were really able to get going. Kavisha, who is from Sri Lanka, was essentially playing on home turf, but she wasn't able to do too much with the bat as well, falling for 22. Nepal captain Indu Burma led this bowling effort from the front, taking 3 very important wickets. Now, if you thought that a spirited performance was something we saw only with the ball, we couldn't imagine what we were going to see with the bat. Samjana Khadka really took this chase upon herself and quite single-handedly got Nepal over the line. If you look at the batting card for Nepal, Samjana scored a 45-ball 72 and she carried her bat through the innings. No other Nepal batter managed to even cross 10 runs. That's how much control she exerted over this chase. There were times when her partners were struggling at the other end, especially when Sita Rana Magar was with her. She just couldn't find that kind of rhythm that Samjana was managing. But no problem, Samjana was very happy to deal in boundaries. There was a lot of pressure that she was single-handedly putting on UAE. Now, it's not like UAE didn't try. There were wickets that fell. In fact, this was a 6-wicket win. So 4 wickets did fall. But everything that was happening on the UAE end was happening at the other end, and Samjana was playing a different game on her own. Kavisha, what she couldn't do with the bat, she managed to compensate with the ball, taking 3 very important wickets. Her 3 for 16 is the best figures registered by a UAE woman in Asia Cup history. But that was just not enough. Their batting effort, which was just 115, was not enough to carry them forward and give them a win. A really sweet part of this victory was in the last couple of balls when the batters out in the middle for Nepal knew that a win was just a couple of minutes away. And so all you could hear over the commentary, we are watching remotely from Chennai, so all we could hear in the commentary was these Nepal cricketers, the entire dugout just screaming their lungs out. And when those winning runs were hit quite appropriately by Samjana Khadka, the entire team ran onto the field and everyone was just crying. Emotions were all over the place because this team has really worked hard to really get where they've been getting. They've been knocking at all of these Associate Nation events, trying to burst their way into bigger platforms like, say, the Asia Cup, even the World Cup, and they're trying to get there bit by bit. If anything, this win will go a very long way in giving this team confidence that they can go up against teams that are of a higher standard and higher competitive experience than them. UAE captain Isha Oza was very straightforward in her assessment of where this game was lost. She spoke about how the batters really needed to step up if they had to do better in the tournament, and the other issue that she identified was how generous they had been with the ball. They didn't bowl in the right areas. There were too many short balls, too many wider balls. There were phases of pressure that were exerted, but they never really managed to consistently hang on to that pressure to really make a dent in what Nepal was trying to do in that chase. The second game was between India and Pakistan. Because of the geopolitical situation these two countries find themselves in, this is billed as a top rivalry. Also because of what happens in the men's vertical. But in the women's vertical, this is a pretty lopsided rivalry, with India having the upper hand by a mile in this equation. But that doesn't matter. The last time these two teams met in the Asia Cup in 2022, Pakistan actually beat India. So there was no reason that shouldn't have happened again, especially because this team now has a new coach. They're trying to do some different stuff. They have a new analyst who's coming from the Multan Sultans. There is some effort being made to really up the standard of this team. But there is a difference between a work-in-progress team and a team that's come out of that mold of being work-in-progress. And that's what we got to see in Dambula in the second match. Pakistan won the toss and opted to bat first. Nida Dhar was playing her 150th match, and she was confident that they would be able to put up a total. Harmanpreet, the first thing that she said at the toss while announcing her team changes was that she was quite happy to field because she knew that her team would be able to restrict Pakistan to a low total, and that's exactly what ended up happening. Pakistan's innings ultimately folded for 109, which is far from conversations that we're having about the Indian group. India comes into this match after a bilateral T20I series against South Africa where they were tested aplenty, but conversations there were about 150 to 170 to even 180 or 190, those being the team total scores. So there was a clear gap in the kind of motivations that these teams' batting units have and the kind of personnel that they're stacking in those lineups. The Indian pacers, Renuka Singh and Pooja Vastrakar, started very, very well. They were able to exert that pressure in terms of putting those dot balls in and trying to restrict how these batters in the middle found the boundary. And that sort of started getting to the Pakistan batters quite often. It could come from the fact that they knew India has a much higher brand of firepower as well. So a higher total was necessary, but that ended up giving way to a lot of rash shots sometimes. They weren't placing their shots properly, so they would ultimately end up holding out to a fielder, lot of top edges, lot of bat swinging and trying to get the ball to the boundary. It was a very challenging ground to play on because it's a 65-meter boundary all along. There was no one shorter side, one longer side, which you could maybe try and exploit. So there were a lot of factors here that made batting in general a little chaotic for this team. But the fact that they just couldn't get going, that lack of rhythm was their undoing. There was an over where Fatima Sana hit 2 sixes, which eventually plumped up Pakistan's total above that 100-run mark. But eventually, this entire batting effort couldn't even cross 110. If you look at India's bowling card, Renuka and Pooja were really good up front. There were boundaries being conceded here and there, and a couple of them were a little expensive, but the overall picture was of a real sense of control. They knew their lines and lengths. The roles were clear. They knew which batter had what weakness, and they went accordingly. Pooja in particular had this technique of setting up these batters where she would deploy those fuller deliveries, but then she'd drag the length back in one odd ball and then deceive the batter, who would then produce a shot that would ultimately land up in another Indian team member's hands. So that was really great from an Indian perspective. Deepti Sharma also had a really good game. She took 3 wickets. Shriyanka Patil took 2 wickets. The Pacers had 2 wickets each. Radha Yadav was the only one in the game who went wicketless, and she also had a few blips on the field. India, even otherwise, besides Radha, had a few moments that they'd want to forget, especially because they've identified fielding as an area that they have to focus on. A couple of runs were leaked because they were a bit clumsy here and there, especially by the boundary line, and those are conversations that Coach Amol Majumdar will continue to have with this team. The Pakistan effort in retaliation just couldn't match up. That also has a lot to do with the kind of rhythm Shafali Verma and Smriti Mandana find themselves in. The pair put on an 85-run stand for the first wicket. 57 runs of that total were slashed off in the power play itself, so that should tell you just how on song this pair was. Nothing that Pakistan was doing was able to do anything to these two. They were able to pick the lines. They were very happy to leave the balls that looked a little troublesome. But Saida Arub Shah, she ended up being the difference. She removed both the openers, Smriti and Shafali. Shafali, in fact, was a delivery that went through the bat and her body straight into the stumps. It was really delightful to watch as a delivery itself. But by then, much of the damage had already been done, and India had the firepower to come to really take the side through to a win. Hemlata, who was coming back after a niggle in the last 2 games versus South Africa, also put on a display of the kind of stroke play that she can really put on show. But even she got a little hasty. I think there was a little bit of restlessness to just get the win out of the way, and she ended up holding to a fielder in the inner circle. Eventually, Jemima and Harmanpreet took the team to a win. It gives their title defense a victorious beginning. India will be gunning for its 8th Asia Cup title, which is the most anybody has managed. The only other team to win the Asia Cup besides India is Bangladesh. So India off to a predictably strong start. One interesting part of this win is that Smriti Mandhana has overtaken Harmanpreet as India's highest scorer in women's T20Is. Knowing these two, this is going to be a tussle that's going to go on for a couple of years, and there are several other candidates in the Indian team who look very poised to sort of strike this record down. So how that goes will be very, very interesting to watch. This is perfect preparation for these teams ahead of the T20 World Cup in Bangladesh. We're seeing a lot of matches being played on the same surface, so how the spinners now start coming into play will be very, very important. It's also an important tournament to figure out how pacers will start finding their rhythm in surfaces that are traditionally supposed to help tweakers more. That's it for day 1's play. On day 2, we have Malaysia taking on Thailand in the 2 p.m. fixture, and we have Sri Lanka versus Bangladesh, a big clash in that 7 p.m. fixture. You can catch all the updates of the ACC Women's Asia Cup on Sportstar. We'll see you in the next video.